While my friend, Senator from Delaware, is on the floor, in Texas we are known for oil and gas production, but the truth is, and what I think we really should be known for, is for an all-of-the-above energy policy. We produce more electricity from wind turbines than any other state in the country, and that's a surprise to a number of people. But one reason for an all-of-the-above energy policy is that during the current hot spell we're experiencing in Texas, I think we've had over 33 days of over 100-degree temperatures in my hometown of Austin, Texas. It's hot. Someone would say, well, of course it's hot. It's July in Texas. But what's happened, we've seen this phenomenon where the wind is not producing nearly as much electricity because it's not blowing as hard as it might otherwise do. So, again, I think if we can encourage an all-of-the-above energy policy, then different segments of the energy picture can fill in at different times and satisfy our overall need. I thought while my friend was speaking on that topic, I would just mention that interesting lesson that we've learned here recently in Texas. Mr. President, last night the Senate moved forward on the CHIPS Act. As colleagues have heard me talk about this before, this was actually filed in 2020. Senator Warner, the senior senator from Virginia, a Democrat, and I, a Republican from Texas, introduced this bill more than 2 years ago. The main concern was that our supply of microcircuits that run everything from our cell phones to our laptop to F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, we depended on a vulnerable supply chain from Asia for those advanced semiconductors. The United States produces 0% of the advanced semiconductors we need here in America. And anybody who has tried to buy a car lately, or even a washing machine or a laptop or a desktop computer, knows that the supply chains of semiconductors and thus these products are severely constrained because our economy has taken off post-COVID-19, but the supply chains can't keep up with them, and particularly the supply of these semiconductors. So that's why this bill is so important. Over the last several days, I've worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to craft a dramatically slimmed down version of the competitiveness bill we passed here in the Senate last summer. The final text of the bill was not released before the procedural vote last night, which was the point of frustration for a number of colleagues, and I can certainly understand. Here they are asked to vote on a procedural vehicle to get on this bill, and they don't know exactly what the bill is going to look like. And that was the reason some of them decided to vote no against the motion to proceed. I completely understand that. But our colleagues will have time to review this bill in the coming days, and I hope that support for this legislation will continue to grow. After all, it's a matter of our economic and national security. The global semiconductor shortage has claimed a lot of attention over the last couple of years because of the impact it's had on consumers. But these aren't existential threats. These are inconveniences because of these constrained supply chains. If, for example, there was another pandemic or a natural disaster, or if, heaven forbid, the People's Republic of China decided to forcibly unify with Taiwan, this could potentially block access to all of the advanced semiconductors that we need in America. And this would be a dramatic negative effect. First of all, it would create almost instantaneously a recession here in America. Thousands of people would be put out of work. But what I want to focus on is the national security consequences. When we send our troops on any mission by air, land, sea, or cyber, we need the very best equipment and technology available. And now more than ever, this technology cannot function without semiconductors, without these chips. Just one example is look at the Javelin missiles that we're sending over to Ukraine to defeat the Russian Federation invasion. Each one of these Javelin missiles that the Ukrainians are using to such good effect requires more than 200 semiconductors in just one Javelin missile. And so far, we've sent 5,500 of them to Ukraine. But it's not just these big items that need chips. It's things like the helmets that our fighter pilots use to fly and navigate, communications devices like radio sets to call in reinforcements to save American lives, smart handheld cameras that attach to our troops' gear that see around the corners that keep them out of harm's way, and even advanced body armor uses semiconductors. If we ever needed to deploy the full force of the United States military and ramp up production to replenish our supplies, we would need an astronomical number of semiconductor chips. That's why bringing that manufacturing capacity back on shore, back home to America, is so important. This has been a big bipartisan priority, as I said, for the last couple of years. And this isn't the first time that semiconductors have been regarded as a matter of national security. Interestingly, in the 1980s, it was a big priority item for President Reagan. At that time, our country was up against the Soviet Union's expansive military forces. President Reagan knew that maintaining our edge would be a result of smarter military systems, not just bigger ones or more of them. As two national security and foreign policy experts from the University of Texas put it, Reagan didn't merely outspin the Soviets, he sought to out-innovate them as well. He pushed to maintain our competitive edge in chips, thereby helping us lead in the advanced weapons and airframes that they enabled. But this isn't just about what happens tomorrow or in 6 months from now. We're talking about safeguarding the developments that will underpin our national security in 10, 20, or 30 years. That's why so many people from diverse political viewpoints support this effort. As we all remember, the CHIPS for America Act received broad bipartisan support when we first voted on it. It was adopted as an amendment to the annual defense authorization bill by a vote of 96-4. 96% of the United States Senate supported the bill. Since it became law a year and a half ago, we've heard from a range of voices and stakeholders that don't typically align. For example, former USTR, U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Robert Lighthizer, who served in the Trump administration, has been a vocal advocate for CHIPS funding. At a Senate Finance Committee meeting 2 years ago, he said semiconductors are a key part of our economy, as well as the future of American security. Biden officials have shared this same sentiment. The Secretaries of Defense and Commerce recently sent a letter to Congress urging swift passage of this CHIPS funding, saying it's, quote, an imperative to our national security, close quote. Countless organizations, experts, businesses, and industry groups have expressed the same point of view. Some of the most respected men and women in the national security world wrote a letter to Congress urging quick action on this funding. That group included a former Secretary of Defense, former CIA director, and former Director of National Intelligence. We've also heard from the National Governors Association and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which represents state and local leaders across the country. We've heard from groups that represent automakers, the defense industry, consumer electronics, and telecommunications companies as well. Last month, a group of more than 120 tech CEOs sent a letter to congressional leaders urging quick action on this legislation. It is rare, especially today, to have such a broad consensus from so many different perspectives on a single issue, advocating one priority. But that's how important this legislation is. And I'm optimistic about where we are at the moment after 2 long years of getting here, and I'm glad Speaker Pelosi has said the House will take up the Senate bill as early as next week. The bottom line, Mr. President, is there's a lot at stake here, and I hope we can deliver a major win for our national security in the coming days. I yield the floor.